The forest closed around them, a living wall of purple. Every leaf and vine seemed to watch. Kane moved them through the tangled undergrowth, his movements a study in minimal sound. The path was not a trail but a memory in his mind, a route he had patrolled a dozen times for the Watchers. Now he used their own maps against them. The air hummed with the energy of the alien night, thick with the scent of damp soil and something else, something sweet and faintly metallic. Luminescent fungi glowed from tree trunks in soft pulses of violet and indigo, casting long, shifting shadows that twisted their perception. It was beautiful in a cold, remote way, a deadly kind of beauty. Swarms of bioluminescent insects drifted through the branches like slow-moving constellations. Their soft blue light was a hazard. It could silhouette their forms against the darkness, painting a target on their backs for any watching eyes, mechanical or biological. He guided them under the heaviest canopy where the glow was weakest, trading speed for cover. Strange calls echoed from the deep woods. A low guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, a high-pitched shriek that cut off abruptly. They were the voices of the planet's native predators, creatures he'd been trained to avoid, not fight. Every snapped twig, every rustle in the high foliage made LRA flinch and Mia's small hand tighten on her mother's. Kane's enhanced senses strained, filtering the night sounds. Was that the scuttle of a carapace over rock or the light footfall of a Watcher scout? The line between natural danger and their pursuers blurred into a constant, gnawing tension. Exhaustion was a weight they all carried. Adrenaline could only fuel them for so long. LRA's steps began to falter, her breathing growing labored on the steeper inclines. Maya's small frame was pushed to its limit. Kane felt it too, a deep weariness that went beyond muscle fatigue. The poison in his veins was a quiet internal drain, a reminder that his strength was finite, his time already counting down. He forced his own body to ignore it, to become a machine of pure function. He found them water from a stream he knew was safe, pointed out edible tubers he'd seen the local fauna eat. His hunter's knowledge was no longer for the kill. It was for their survival. The environment was their first and most immediate foe. It tested their resolve with every step. A steep rock face to scramble up, their fingers scraping on rough stone. A patch of thorny creepers that tore at their clothes and skin. A wide, shallow river they had to ford, the cold water soaking them to the waist. Each obstacle was a delay. Each minute lost brought the Watchers closer. They moved in near total silence, communicating with hand signals and looks. Words were a luxury they could not afford. Sound was a threat. Stealth was their only advantage, a fragile shield against a force that had every other advantage. They were ghosts in the purple dark, hoping the night would swallow them whole. The sound began as a low vibration in the air, a hum that seemed to resonate in the bones before it reached the ears. It grew from a background whisper to a distinct mechanical presence directly overhead. Kane froze, one hand snapping up in a sharp closed fist signal. They all stopped. Through a break in the thick purple canopy, a Watcher hover drone sliced into view. Its design was sleek and predatory, all sharp angles and dark, non-reflective surfaces. Twin beams of brilliant white light stabbed down from its undercarriage, sweeping methodically across the forest floor. The lights carved through the shadows, illuminating swirling motes of pollen and dust, turning the familiar terrain into an alien, exposed landscape. This was not a random patrol. It was a scout, a dedicated hunter. Its sensors were far more advanced than simple visual scanners. Standard evasion tactics were useless against it. Staying still would not save them. Its thermal imaging could pick up the heat signature of their bodies even through moderate cover. Its motion detectors could register the slightest tremor, a breath held too long, a heartbeat. It was designed to find life, and to report that life's exact coordinates. The margin for error had just evaporated. There was no hiding, only masking. Kane's mind worked fast, pulling data from his memory. He knew this model. He knew its scan pattern was a predictable grid, left to right, with a slight lag as it processed each sector. He knew it had a brief communication blackout every 90 seconds as it encrypted and sent its data burst back to command. Its blind spot was directly below and slightly behind its engine housing, a small cone of cover from its primary sensors. He didn't have time to explain. He grabbed LRA's arm and shoved Mia gently forward, pushing them all into a dense thicket of the largest luminescent fungi he could see. The fungi pulsed with a soft, internal violet light. Their strange bioenergy created a chaotic field of interference. To the drone's sophisticated sensors, their 3 heat signatures would blur into the larger, cooler energy bloom of the fungal colony. It was a desperate gamble, using the planet's own weird biology as a shield against its invaders. They crouched low, pressing themselves into the damp soil between the giant glowing stalks. The thick, sweet metallic scent of the fungi filled their nostrils. The hum of the drone grew louder, descending closer. The searchlight swept across the edge of their hiding place, the white light stark against the soft purple glow. The beam played over the fungi just meters away, illuminating every vein and contour. For 3 long seconds the light held on their position. Kane could feel LRA's body tensed beside him, rigid with fear. He could hear Mia's small, quick breaths. He himself did not breathe. His entire focus was on the machine above, tracking its movements by sound alone, waiting for the pitch change that would mean it had locked on and was calling for reinforcements. The light lingered, the drone processors analyzing the anomalous energy readings. Then with a soft whir the beam slid away, continuing their methodical sweep. The hum began to recede, moving off through the trees. They remained frozen for a full minute after the sound had faded entirely. The only noise was the normal chorus of the night forest, which now felt deafeningly loud. They had evaded it, this time, but the message was received and understood. The hunt was no longer theoretical. The Watchers were not just looking for them. They were actively, technologically hunting them. Their presence was now a confirmed blip on the enemy's screen. The sheer capability of that single drone made their own chances feel vanishingly small. Every step from now on would be taken under the unseen eye of that technology. They had no room for mistakes. The chase was official, and their lead was already shortening. The scientists could not quantify it. Their scans and tissue samples revealed a battle fought at a microscopic level, a war between the engineered poison and something else entirely. They searched for a scientific explanation, a flaw in the toxin's chemistry, an unexpected interaction with his specific augmentations, but the data refused to conform. The resilience they observed defied their logic of control. Their entire system was built on predictable cause and effect. Disobedience resulted in a swift, certain death. This was neither swift nor certain. It was a protracted, stubborn resistance that ended only when the rocks finished what the poison could not. They noted other anomalies in their final report. Elevated stress markers consistent with extreme willpower, far beyond documented human limits. Neural activity that suggested not panic, but intense, focused determination lasting until the final moment of impact. They logged these observations as data points, as curiosities. They described it as a lingering humanity, a variable they had not adequately calculated for. They could not understand that will could be a physiological force, that a promise could alter chemistry. To them, he remained an enigma, a subject that broke their rules even in death. Their report was filed, a collection of unanswered questions and unquantifiable data. They could dissect his body, but they could not dissect his choice. They could map his augmentations, but they could not chart the moment he decided to be human again. His final defiance was not in the fight he gave, but in the mystery he left behind. It was written in his very cells, a testament to something their science could not measure, control, or ever truly understand. The perfect tool had broken in a way that suggested it was never a tool at all. The sound of falling water grew from a distant murmur to a steady roar. They pushed through the final curtain of hanging vines, their bodies aching with exhaustion. Before them, a waterfall cascaded down a sheer rock face, its mist cooling their skin. This was the landmark. The coordinates in LRA's memory led here, to what looked like a dead end. She moved to the side of the falls, her fingers tracing the wet rock until they found a seam. A hidden panel slid back with a soft hiss, revealing a tunnel carved into the mountain. The air from inside was warm and carried the faint, clean scent of filtered water and growing things. They stepped through, and the panel sealed behind them, cutting off the sound of the falls. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. It was not a dark hole. Light came from above, filtered through cleverly disguised openings in the mountain's peak, illuminating a community nestled in the heart of the stone. Structures were built into the walls and scattered across the floor. A mix of reclaimed Watcher metal and native rock. People moved with purpose. Humans and Noru worked side by side, tending to hydroponic gardens, repairing equipment, sharing food. The contrast to the world outside was immediate and profound. This was not just a hiding place. It was a society. They were seen immediately. A man broke from a group and walked toward them. His face was lined, his posture that of someone used to command. He was the man from the briefing files. Marcus, the man Kane had been sent to hunt. He looked at LRA and Mia, his eyes taking in their worn clothes, their haunted expressions. He did not raise a weapon. He simply stood and waited for them to speak. LRA told their story. Her voice was quiet but clear in the vast space. She spoke of the hunt, the purple forest, the child's plea. She spoke of the collar coming off. She spoke of Kane. She told them about the ravine. She described his choice to lead the Watchers away, to use his own death as a diversion to clear their path. As she spoke, others gathered. Humans in Nauru stopped their work and listened. The telling was met with a deep, shared silence. It was a silence of recognition. They understood the precise cost of such an act. They knew the weight of the collar, the finality of that choice. They did not see a hunter. They saw a man who had remembered himself at the end. They grieved for a stranger, because his sacrifice was a language they all spoke. Medics were called. They were given clean water, real food, a safe place to rest. For the first time since the night the Watchers came for her husband, LRA felt the knot of constant fear in her chest begin to loosen. Maya was examined by a healer, a Nauru woman with gentle hands who confirmed the child was unharmed, just exhausted. They were shown to a small alcove with 2 cots and a basin. It was safe. It was warm. It was a future. Kane's promise, changed and broken and remade, was finally kept. He had not reached it with them, but his actions had carved the path. His death had purchased this single incredible outcome, their safety. His sacrifice was not a futile end in the dirt. It was the reason they were alive. It was the foundation upon which their new life could begin. They had lost everything, but they had gained haven. Maya kept the disc. It was a small, battered circle of metal, its surface scratched and dulled from years of handling. Tucked safely inside her tunic, she would take it out sometimes when she thought no one was looking. Her small fingers would trace the edge, feeling the faint seams. Inside was the photograph. A man, a woman, a little girl with bright eyes, all smiling on a beach under a yellow sun. It was a world away. It was proof, not just of a life lost, but of a humanity reclaimed. These artifacts were no longer personal effects. They were relics. His story began to circulate. It started in quiet tones around the evening fires, passed from LRA to Marcus, from Marcus to the council. It was told by the healers who had examined her, by the sentries who had seen the state they arrived in. The details were sharp and real. The collar, the child's plea, the choice in the ravine. It was not a sanitized legend. It was a story of a broken man who found one last piece of himself in the face of a child and chose to die on his feet, rather than live on his knees. It was told and retold, each telling solidifying its truth. The story did something to the people of Haven. For years, their resistance had been about survival, hiding, enduring. The story of Kane introduced a new variable, active, calculated defiance. It proved the Watcher's control was a system, and like any system, it could be broken. It had a flaw. That flaw was choice. One man's choice had ruined a hunt, destroyed a patrol, and saved 2 lives. His death was not a defeat. It was a blueprint. It made the impossible seem possible. It made defiance not a suicide mission, but a strategic option. People began to look at the world outside their cavern with different eyes. The patrols were not an invincible force. They were a problem to be solved. The collars were not an absolute sentence. They were a device that could be removed. His memory became a tool, a weapon. His name was mentioned before risky scavenging runs. His story a reminder of what was at stake. It was invoked in strategy meetings, not as a sentimental tale, but as a case study in asymmetrical warfare. He had used the Watcher's own tools, their own terrain, against them. He had shown them how. His sacrifice was the spark, but the people of Haven were the tinder. They had been waiting in the dark, preserving the ember of their freedom. His story was the oxygen. It caught and it spread. The quiet community began to change. Scavenging missions became more audacious. Patrol routes were mapped with new purpose. The goal shifted from mere survival to proactive disruption. They began to see themselves not as refugees, but as the beginning of an answer, a resistance. One man's choice to be human again had reminded them all what they were fighting for. It was no longer about hiding from the Watchers. It was about challenging them. The fight was no longer for a single sanctuary. It was for every soul still trapped in the dark. The revolution was not a future event. It was born the moment he turned from the hunt. It was growing right now in the heart of the mountain. The scientists could not quantify it. Their scans and tissue samples revealed a battle fought at a microscopic level, a war between the engineered poison and something else entirely. They searched for a scientific explanation, a flaw in the toxin's chemistry, an unexpected interaction with his specific augmentations. But the data refused to conform. The resilience they observed defied their logic of control. Their entire system was built on predictable cause and effect. Disobedience resulted in a swift, certain death. This was neither swift nor certain. It was a protracted, stubborn resistance that ended only when the rocks finished what the poison could not. They noted other anomalies in their final report. Elevated stress markers consistent with extreme willpower, far beyond documented human limits. Neural activity that suggested not panic but intense focused determination, lasting until the final moment of impact. They logged these observations as data points, as curiosities. They described it as a lingering humanity, a variable they had not adequately calculated for. They could not understand that will could be a physiological force, that a promise could alter chemistry. To them, he remained an enigma, a subject that broke their rules even in death. Their report was filed, a collection of unanswered questions and unquantifiable data. They could dissect his body, but they could not dissect his choice. They could map his augmentations, but they could not chart the moment he decided to be human again. His final defiance was not in the fight he gave, but in the mystery he left behind. It was written in his very cells, a testament to something their science could not measure, control, or ever truly understand. The perfect tool had broken in a way that suggested it was never a tool at all. The sound of falling water grew from a distant murmur to a steady roar. They pushed through the final curtain of hanging vines, their bodies aching with exhaustion. Before them, a waterfall cascaded down a sheer rock face, its mist cooling their skin. This was the landmark. The coordinates in LRA's memory led here, to what looked like a dead end. She moved to the side of the falls, her fingers tracing the wet rock until they found a seam. A hidden panel slid back with a soft hiss, revealing a tunnel carved into the mountain. The air from inside was warm and carried the faint, clean scent of filtered water and growing things. They stepped through, and the panel sealed behind them, cutting off the sound of the falls. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. It was not a dark hole. Light came from above, filtered through cleverly disguised openings in the mountain's peak, illuminating a community nestled in the heart of the stone. Structures were built into the walls and scattered across the floor, a mix of reclaimed Watcher metal and native rock. People moved with purpose. Humans and Nauru worked side by side, tending to hydroponic gardens, repairing equipment, sharing food. The contrast to the world outside was immediate and profound. This was not just a hiding place. It was a society. They were seen immediately. A man broke from a group and walked toward them. His face was lined, his posture that of someone used to command. He was the man from the briefing files, Marcus, the man Kane had been sent to hunt. He looked at LRA and Maya, his eyes taking in their worn clothes, their haunted expressions. He did not raise a weapon. He simply stood and waited for them to speak. LRA told their story. Her voice was quiet but clear in the vast space. She spoke of the hunt, the purple forest, the child's plea. She spoke of the collar coming off. She spoke of Kane. She told them about the ravine. She described his choice to lead the Watchers away, to use his own death as a diversion to clear their path. As she spoke, others gathered. Humans and Nauru stopped their work and listened. The telling was met with a deep, shared silence. It was a silence of recognition. They understood the precise cost of such an act. They knew the weight of the collar, the finality of that choice. They did not see a hunter. They saw a man who had remembered himself at the end. They grieved for a stranger, because his sacrifice was a language they all spoke. Medics were called. They were given clean water, real food, a safe place to rest. For the first time since the night the Watchers came for her husband, LRA felt the knot of constant fear in her chest begin to loosen. Mia was examined by a healer, a Nauru woman with gentle hands who confirmed the child was unharmed, just exhausted. They were shown to a small alcove with 2 cots and a basin. It was safe. It was warm. It was a future. Kane's promise, changed and broken and remade, was finally kept. He had not reached it with them, but his actions had carved the path. His death had purchased this single incredible outcome, their safety. His sacrifice was not a futile end in the dirt. It was the reason they were alive. It was the foundation upon which their new life could begin. They had lost everything, but they had gained haven. Mia kept the disc. It was a small, battered circle of metal, its surface scratched and dulled from years of handling. Tucked safely inside her tunic, she would take it out sometimes when she thought no one was looking. Her small fingers would trace the edge, feeling the faint seams. Inside was the photograph. A man, a woman, a little girl with bright eyes, all smiling on a beach under a yellow sun. It was a world away. It was proof, not just of a life lost, but of a humanity reclaimed. These artifacts were no longer personal effects. They were relics. His story began to circulate. It started in quiet tones around the evening fires, passed from LRA to Marcus, from Marcus to the Council. It was told by the healers who had examined her, by the sentries who had seen the state they arrived in. The details were sharp and real. The collar, the child's plea, the choice in the ravine. It was not a sanitized legend. It was a story of a broken man who found one last piece of himself in the face of a child and chose to die on his feet rather than live on his knees. It was told and retold, each telling solidifying its truth. The story did something to the people of Haven. For years, their resistance had been about survival, hiding, enduring. The story of Kane introduced a new variable: active, calculated defiance. It proved the Watcher's control was a system, and like any system, it could be broken. It had a flaw. That flaw was choice. One man's choice had ruined a hunt, destroyed a patrol, and saved 2 lives. His death was not a defeat. It was a blueprint. It made the impossible seem possible. It made defiance not a suicide mission, but a strategic option. People began to look at the world outside their cavern with different eyes. The patrols were not an invincible force. They were a problem to be solved. The collars were not an absolute sentence. They were a device that could be removed. His memory became a tool, a weapon. His name was mentioned before risky scavenging runs, his story a reminder of what was at stake. It was invoked in strategy meetings, not as a sentimental tale but as a case study in asymmetrical warfare. He had used the Watcher's own tools, their own terrain, against them. He had shown them how. His sacrifice was the spark, but the people of Haven were the tinder. They had been waiting in the dark, preserving the ember of their freedom. His story was the oxygen. It caught and it spread. The quiet community began to change. Scavenging missions became more audacious. Patrol routes were mapped with new purpose. The goal shifted from mere survival to proactive disruption. They began to see themselves not as refugees, but as the beginning of an answer, a resistance. One man's choice to be human again had reminded them all what they were fighting for. It was no longer about hiding from the Watchers. It was about challenging them. The fight was no longer for a single sanctuary. It was for every soul still trapped in the dark. The revolution was not a future event. It was born the moment he turned from the hunt. It was growing right now in the heart of the mountain. Kane's journey shows that humanity is not erased. It is chosen. Even when stripped down and remade into a tool, the capacity for moral choice remains. His sacrifice proves that within the darkest systems, a single act of defiance can ignite a fire. His decision in the ravine was not an end. It was a catalyst, turning survival into rebellion. This story closes not with a conclusion, but with a beginning. A revolution, sparked by one man's reclaimed conscience, now waits in the mountain's heart, ready to be born. He wore a collar that would kill him if he failed. For years, Kane hunted for the Watchers, obeying their every command just to survive another week. Then a green-skinned child looked up at him and said 7 words that changed everything. "Please, you're not like them." In that moment, his entire world shattered. Purple vines snagged his sleeve as he moved through the undergrowth. Each step was measured, each breath controlled. A faint hum came from the band of cold metal fused to his neck. Kane's eyes swept the terrain, enhanced optics filtering the dim light, spotting heat signatures and movement invisible to ordinary sight. The collar registered his heart rate, his respiration, the steadiness of his hands. Any sign of hesitation, Any failure to complete the assigned hunt and the device would respond. Not with a warning. With poison, his survival was a transaction. One successful capture per week bought an antidote dose. Missed the quota and the toxin would release. First came the pain. A fire in the veins they said was worse than any weapon. Then system shutdown. Quick, they assured him. Efficient. The Watchers valued efficiency above all else. They had taken strong, capable humans and turned them into instruments. His augmented strength let him run for miles without tiring. His heightened senses could track a target across rock and through river. But these upgrades were not gifts. They were leashes. Each one made him more useful to them and less himself. Every choice was made through the lens of that threat. Where to step. When to rest. Whether to eat the last of his rations now or save them. It narrowed his world to a single stark equation: obey or die. Failure meant more than his own death. It meant his existence would end without meaning. He would simply vanish, another faulty tool discarded, and the Watcher's system would continue unchallenged. The collar was the ultimate argument against defiance. It made the idea of resistance feel like a fantasy, a pointless death wish. This control was absolute. It dictated his pace through the forest, it governed his focus, it even shaped his thoughts. For years it had worked. It had made him a perfect, predictable tool. He was a piece of their machine, and the machine required every piece to function without error. His world was this: the hunt, the timer, the antidote. A closed loop of survival that left no room for anything else. It was a logic so complete, so inescapable, that it felt like the only reality, until a different kind of logic found him. A voice, quiet and sure, spoke from the shadows and asked him to remember what he was. A shape detached itself from the deeper black behind a moss-crusted boulder. It stepped into the silver wash of the twin moons. Not an animal, a child. Her skin held the faint greenish cast of the Naru, a people the Watchers had broken just as they had broken his. Her eyes were wide, dark pools that seemed too large for her face. She made no move to run. She did not raise her hands. She simply stood there, a small figure in the vast, hostile night, and looked directly at him. His training screamed at him. Target identified. Nauru female, juvenile. Escape risk. The protocol was clear. Restrain, tag, and deliver. His hand twitched toward the binders on his belt. But his fingers didn't close around them. Her stillness was a question. Her exposure was an answer. She had chosen to be seen. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear, cutting through the chorus of night insects. Please. The word hung between them, fragile. You're not like them. It wasn't a shout or a sob. It was a statement. A quiet, devastating certainty. It landed not as a plea for mercy, but as a demand for recognition. It challenged the core identity the collar had forged, the one he had accepted to survive. It named him something else. Behind the boulder, a flicker of movement betrayed another presence. Her mother, watching, waiting, holding her breath. This was a calculated risk, a desperate parent's terrible gamble, placing their fate not in strength but in the hope of a stranger's conscience. It was a move of pure, terrifying faith. From a tactical viewpoint, it was a catastrophic error, a child's mistake that could get them all killed. He could signal the Watchers right now. He could end this in seconds, but her certainty was a splinter in his mind. It didn't fit. It defied the logic of his world. It suggested a truth he had buried. His enhanced hearing picked up the rapid, frightened beat of her heart, a tiny drum against the silence. She was scared, but she stood her ground. Her belief in him, this thing she saw that he could not, created the first hairline fracture in the armor around his will. It was a tiny crack, but through it, a cold, forgotten air began to seep. He didn't move. The hunt was forgotten. The collar's timer for one suspended moment meant nothing. Her 7 words echoed in the silence he left, finding purchase in a place he had thought sealed off forever. They pulled at a single, loose thread in the fabric of his controlled existence. He had been a hunter, a tool, a slave. She looked at him and saw a man. And in that look, something long extinguished flickered, hesitant and raw, deep within the hollow the Watchers had made. The child's dark eyes, wide and unblinking, drove a spike deep into Kane's memory. They were the same shade of trusting dark as Ellie's. He hadn't allowed himself to think that name in years. His mind fractured. The purple forest vanished, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of salt air and the sound of gentle waves on a shore he would never walk again. A small hand in his, sticky from ice cream as they walked on perfect white sand. Green trees, real green, not this alien violet rustling under a warm yellow sun. His daughter's laugh, a sound so bright it felt like a physical thing. Ellie would be just about this girl's age now. The Watcher ships had come on a Tuesday. They blotted out the sun, their shadows cold and final. The memory was a series of shattered images. Sarah's hand torn from his, the raw scream swallowed by the roar of engines, the impossible sight of his little girl being pulled into a beam of harsh blue light. He had fought. It hadn't mattered. The loss was a physical hollowing out, a cavity in his chest where his heart and his future used to be. To survive after that, he had filled that void with nothing, with numbness, with the strict, cold logic of the hunt. It was the only way to endure the days, the only way to not go mad from the failure of it. Mia's face made that hollow space ache. It was a phantom pain, deep and undeniable. Her vulnerability was a mirror reflecting his own daughter's, her fear echoing the terror Ellie must have felt. This wasn't an abstract moral problem anymore. This wasn't about right or wrong according to some fated code. It was a direct personal challenge. His choice was no longer about a hunt. It was about a pattern. The Watchers had taken his child. They were about to take hers. He had been powerless to stop it then. His body had been augmented, his senses heightened, all to serve the very force that had destroyed his life. He had become a tool for the architects of his own grief. Looking at Maya, he understood the true cost of his obedience. Every Naru he had ever captured, every soul he had delivered back into that system of control, had been somebody's child, somebody's parent. He had been a cog in the machine that created orphans, that shattered families, that carved out the same hollow spaces in others that lived inside him. His inaction now would be a repetition of his greatest failure. It would be him, not the Watchers, failing another child. It would be him delivering the final blow. The past and present collapsed into this single moment, this single child standing in the moonlight. The collar on his neck felt suddenly heavier, a weight of complicity. To walk away was impossible. It would be a betrayal of the man he used to be and the father he had failed to be. Mia wasn't just a stranger. She was a testament. A second chance, he knew, with a clarity that was absolute, he would not waste. The silence between them was no longer empty. It filled with the sound of their shared breath, the rustle of their movement, the unspoken agreement that their fates were now one. Kane walked point, his posture different. The hunter's efficient prowl was gone, replaced by a broader stance, a constant visual sweep that took in every potential threat to the two figures behind him. He was no longer their captor. He was a shield. His purpose had narrowed to a single stark objective: get them through this. LRA watched his back as they moved. Her trust was a practical thing, born of a terrible lack of options. She saw the competence in his movements, the way he knew the land. But the ghost of what he was lingered in the space between them. She remembered the stories of the human hunter, the one who never failed to bring his quarry in. She had seen the coldness in his eyes that first moment in the clearing. That man was still there, a shadow behind the protector. Her reliance on him was absolute, but it was threaded with a deep residual fear. She trusted his skills. She was not yet sure she trusted his heart. Mia felt no such conflict. Her faith was a simple, unwavering force. When a strange cry echoed from the darkness, her head didn't swivel toward the sound. It turned toward him. She searched his face, her large eyes looking for a sign that he was not alarmed. His calm, a small nod, the set of his shoulders. These were her reassurances. With each danger they passed, each obstacle he cleared for them, her belief in him seemed to solidify. She saw the man who had chosen them over his own life. That was all the proof she needed. He took the last watch every time they risked a few minutes of sleep. He would press a strip of dried nutrient paste into their hands, taking the smallest portion for himself. He found clean water in hidden seeps, testing it himself first. These were small acts, but in the economy of survival they were everything. They were the language of a new contract being written between them. Their continued existence depended entirely on the knowledge the Watchers had forced into his mind. Their humanity, however, depended on the bond slowly forming in the dark. It was a fragile thing, built on shared exhaustion and a common enemy. For the first time since the invasion, the weight on his shoulders was not about his own survival. It was about theirs. The collar had been a physical burden, a constant, painful reminder of his servitude. This responsibility was different. It was internal. It was the crushing knowledge that every decision he made, every path he chose, carried the consequence of their lives or deaths. His failure would not be a private end in the dirt. It would be their end too. This was a far heavier weight. The collar demanded obedience. This demanded care. A fragile unit began to cohere in the shadows. They moved with a shared rhythm, anticipating each other's steps. A silent exchange of a water skin, a hand briefly steadying an elbow on a slick incline. They were not a family by blood, but they were becoming one by circumstance and necessity. They were three separate strands of loss and fear, slowly twisting together into a single, stronger cord. He was no longer fighting for the abstract idea of freedom or the memory of a lost past. He was fighting for the tangible reality of the woman and child breathing behind him. His own survival had become secondary. Theirs was the only victory that mattered. Their rest stop was a shallow cave behind a curtain of hanging moss, just deep enough to shield them from the open sky. Bellaray watched Mia's quiet breathing as the child slept, curled against the rock wall. Then her eyes found Kane, checking the charge on the scavenged energy cell from the Watcher Scout. The silence felt heavy with things unsaid. She spoke into it, her voice low, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "They do not just take our bodies," she began. "They take our minds. They break us and then they rebuild us to their design." She explained that the collars, the augments, the entire system of control was rooted in something physical, a resource. Strange resonant crystals the Watchers mined from deep volcanic vents on the dark side of the planet. These crystals were the core of everything. Their energy powered the ships and the drones. But their real value was in their unique vibrational frequency, a property that allowed them to interface directly with organic tissue. The Watchers had learned to use this property to rewrite biology itself. The augmentations were not just implants. They were biological edits, forcing muscles to grow denser, nerves to fire faster, senses to expand beyond natural limits. But every enhancement came with a catch. The process was designed to strip away psychological resistance. It bred out defiance. It engineered obedience into the very cells. The perfect hunter was not just trained. He was grown like a weapon from a seed. Her husband, Tar, had been a materials scientist. He had studied the crystals long before the Watchers came. He believed their resonant energy could be tuned for healing, for mending bone and tissue at an incredible rate. He saw them as a key to ending disease, to extending life. His research was one of hope. The Watchers saw it and saw a blueprint for a new kind of army. They took his work and inverted it. They turned a tool for mending into a tool for breaking. They used his findings to perfect the collar's toxin, to design the augmentation protocols that erased the will to resist. His legacy in their hands became a chain, but Tar was not a fool. When he saw the direction of their work, he hid his core research. He encrypted his true findings, his notes on the crystal's regenerative potential, and scattered the data. He did it hoping someone, someday, would find it, that they would finish what he started, that the key to breaking the Watchers' control might be hidden within the very science they used to enforce it. The war was not just a fight across this purple landscape. It was a battle happening at a microscopic level, a fight over knowledge. The Watchers owned the application of the science, but the understanding, the fundamental truth of it, that was a thing they could still steal back. Kane listened, the energy cell cold in his hand. He thought of the poison moving through his own veins, a product of that twisted science. He thought of his heightened reflexes, his unnatural stamina. They were all pieces of the same terrible puzzle. The conflict was no longer a simple matter of outrunning soldiers. It was about understanding the engine of their oppression. The crystals that powered the drones hunting them could, in theory, also power the device that might save his life. The technology that enslaved him could be the very thing that set them free. It was a dangerous, fragile hope, but it was a strategic one. It meant their enemy's greatest strength might also be their critical weakness. Kane's path through the wilderness took on a new shape. It was no longer just flight. It was a heading. They spoke of it in low tones during a brief halt, the name itself a fragile thing. Haven. It was a word passed in whispers among the enslaved, a story told to keep hope alive in the darkest cells. Most considered it a myth, a comforting lie to make the chains feel lighter. But LRA spoke of it as a fact. Her voice held the certainty of a shared secret. It was not just a hiding place. It was a sanctuary, a community built by those who had slipped the Watcher's grasp. Humans and Naru together, living free in the deep mountains, a functioning pocket of defiance in a conquered world. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. It meant the resistance was not just a concept. It had a location. It had people. It had a future. This changed the nature of their run completely. They were not just fugitives. They were potential recruits on a desperate pilgrimage. LRA's next words tightened the knot in Kane's gut. Her husband, Tar, had not just known of Haven. He had helped to design its security systems. He knew its exact location, its vulnerabilities, its strengths. He had given her the coordinates, a final gift and a burden, trusting her memory to keep it safe. Kane looked away, his gaze fixed on the purple horizon. He had to offer his own truth in return. It was a necessary risk. His voice was flat when he said it. I was sent to find a man named Marcus, to bring him in. He didn't look at her as he spoke. He didn't need to see the flicker of fear and reassessment in her eyes. Marcus was a leader in Haven, a primary target for the Watchers. Kane's mission before the clearing, before Mia, had been to dismantle the very hope they were now running toward. The tension in their small group shifted. It was no longer just the external threat of the Watchers. It was an internal, unspoken question. What would happen when they arrived? Would his actions be seen as a betrayal too great to forgive? Would they see the hunter first and the protector second? His presence could be a key that unlocked their sanctuary, or a poison that shattered it from within. His past was a ghost running beside them now. The third scout was more cautious, hanging back, using his comm to call it in. Kane couldn't let that happen. He charged, ignoring the searing pain in his side from the night hunter's wounds. The fight was a blur of motion and impact. A shock staff grazed his shoulder, numbness spreading down his arm. He drove his knee into the scout's stomach, then his forehead into the man's faceplate. The visor cracked. The scout staggered. Kane finished it with a savage blow to the neck. Silence returned to the ravine, broken only by his ragged breathing. He stood over the two bodies, his hands bloody. The cost of the fight was immediate. The old wounds on his side had reopened, bleeding through his shirt. A deep ache pulsed in his shoulder where the shock staff had hit. The toxin in his veins seemed to flare with the effort, a fresh wave of fire spreading through his limbs. He was gravely wounded. He moved quickly, his movements stiff with pain. He scavenged what he could from the scouts. A full water container, a packet of dried meat, a fresh energy cell. These small prizes were their lifeline. He had bought them minutes, maybe less, but the price was written on his body, in the blood and the fresh damage. He was no longer a disobedient tool. He was a killer of Watchers, a true enemy. The line had been crossed permanently. There was no going back. The hum of the distant drone grew louder, answering the dead scout's call. He turned and ran, each step a jarring reminder of the cost of their freedom. He found them huddled in the lee of a giant, petrified tree root, its twisted form offering the barest sliver of cover. His own body was a collection of failing signals. The tremors in his hands were constant now, a fine vibration he could no longer hide. The world swam at the edges of his vision, a purple haze that only sharpened with a painful effort of will. Every breath was a labor, the toxin a fire in his chest. He looked at them, at LRA's exhausted hope and Mia's unwavering trust, and he knew the final calculation was done. He could not complete this journey. His presence was no longer protection. It was an anchor, a slow, dying weight that would doom them all. He knelt, the motion stiff and careful. The ground felt unsteady beneath him. He looked at Mia, her small face smudged with dirt, her eyes too old for her age. The promise he had made in the purple forest felt like a lifetime ago. A promise from a different man. He had to make a new one. His voice was rough, stripped down to its bare essentials. I will get you to Haven. He saw the confusion flicker in her eyes. He had just said they were close. Why say it again? He explained it as simply as he could. Sometimes a promise has to change to be kept. He laid it out for LRA, his words flat and tactical. The main Watcher force was concentrating its search. They had drones on a grid pattern, ground patrols sweeping the lower valleys. His plan was a simple diversion. He would lead them away. He would make enough noise, leave enough of a trail, to pull the hunters off the true scent. He would draw them into the high, broken cliffs to the east, a terrain of dead ends and rock slides. It was a path that led nowhere but to a fight. He did not say he would die there. He didn't need to. The acceptance was in his eyes and the set of his shoulders. It was a quiet, heartbreaking understanding. LRA listened, her face a mask of grim necessity. She did not argue. She did not offer false hope. She saw the truth written in his pallor, in the way he held his injured side. She knew the mathematics of sacrifice. Her nod was a small, terrible thing. It was the acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. Maya understood less, but she felt the finality in the air, the change in his tone, the way her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder. She looked at him, and though the words were beyond her, she felt the shift. Her protector was preparing to leave. His role was transforming before their eyes. The guide was gone. The shield was being set down. What remained was the final, most essential function, the sacrifice. His last act would not be one of guidance, but of misdirection, a pure calculated act of defiance. He would use the last of his strength, the last of his time, to become the brightest, loudest target he could be. He would be the flame, and he would draw every moth to him. It was the only way to keep his promise. He stood up, his body protesting every movement. He gave them one last look, a silent transfer of responsibility. Then he turned and began walking away from their safety, toward the sound of the coming storm. His footsteps were steady. His purpose was absolute. He led them to the eastern cliffs, a landscape of shattered rock and deep ravines. The ground here was unstable, fractured by ancient seismic shifts. He made no effort to hide his trail. He kicked loose stones, left clear footprints in the patches of dust. He fired a single energy burst from the scavenged rifle into the air. The blue flash was a beacon. The answering hum of drone engines grew from a whisper to a roar. They were coming. He had their full attention now. He chose his ground with a hunter's final calculation, a narrow ravine, its walls sheer and high. The floor was littered with loose scree and massive, precariously balanced boulders. He positioned himself at the dead end, his back to a wall of crumbling stone. It was a trap, and he was the bait. He had nothing left to lose. The poison was afire in his nerves, his vision tunneling. The wounds on his side were a dull, throbbing ache. His body was a failing machine, but his will was a sharp, clear point. The first Watcher scouts appeared at the mouth of the ravine. Then more. They moved in, their forms dark against the twin moon's light. They were cautious at first, then confident. They had him cornered. They advanced, shock staves humming. The fight was not a duel. It was a whirlwind of pure survival. He used the narrow space against them, funneling them into ones and twos. He fought with a desperate, brutal economy, a shattered rock to a helmet, a redirected energy blast into another scout. He used his body as a weapon, his augmented strength his final advantage. Every movement cost him. He felt a rib crack under a blow. His injured leg buckled, then held. He was drawing them in, deeper into the kill box. He could see their commander barking orders, calling in more units. They were all focusing on him. The ravine was filling with them. Perfect. His blood dripped on the stone, a dark promise. He waited for the right moment, for the maximum number of bodies in the confined space. Then he acted. He raised the rifle one last time, not aiming at them, but at a specific fracture line high on the ravine wall he had spotted earlier. He fired. The blue energy bolt struck the weak point for a second, nothing. Then a deep grinding groan echoed through the ravine. A crack spread like lightning across the rock face. Then the world came apart. The entire section of cliff face sheared away, tons of rock and dust crashing down into the narrow passage. The sound was immense, a roar that swallowed the shouts of the scouts. He saw them look up, their forms silhouetted against the falling rock. He did not try to run. There was nowhere to go. The last thing he saw was not the descending stone. It was the clear path behind the collapsing ravine, the route west that was now free of pursuit. It was open. They could make it. A strange peace settled over him. The fire in his veins seemed to quiet. The promise was kept. Then the darkness took him, not as an end, but as a final, decisive act. The rock buried him and his pursuers together, sealing the tomb. The hunter was gone. His story, it seemed, was over. But his death was not a period. It was a catalyst. A signal flare shot into the night, announcing that defiance was possible. That one man could break the chain. The recovery team pulled his body from the rubble with mechanical efficiency. They treated him as debris, a broken component to be examined. In a clean white lab deep within a Watcher facility, the body was laid on a cold steel table. The chief physician began the autopsy with clinical precision, cutting into the flesh with sharp, practiced motions. The goal was data. They needed to understand how a tool had broken and how to prevent it from happening again. Their control depended on predictability. Their first finding created immediate confusion. The toxin had been released from the collar. The reservoir was empty, but it had not disseminated through his system as designed. The poison should have flooded his bloodstream, causing rapid system failure within minutes. Instead, it had been partially contained. Its spread slowed and uneven. His cellular structure showed evidence of a fierce internal struggle. Evidence of regeneration fought against the toxin's destructive path. This was not in the design parameters. It was an anomaly, an impossibility, according to their understanding of human physiology. But the alternative was unthinkable. Haven was their only chance. It was the only place remote enough, secret enough to possibly evade the Watcher's endless search. More urgently, it was their only hope for an antidote. The community was rumored to have scientists, healers, others who had escaped the labs. They might have the knowledge, the equipment, to counter the toxin slowly claiming him. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one he had. The journey solidified into a grim race against a double countdown. The Watchers closing in from behind, the poison spreading within. Their goal was no longer an abstract idea of freedom. It was a specific set of mountain coordinates, a hidden waterfall entrance, a man named Marcus who had every reason to hate him. It was a dangerous, distant light, but in the profound darkness of their galaxy it was the only one left. Every painful step was measured against it. Every decision was weighed against the need to reach that single point on the map before his body, or the Watchers, stopped them for good. Their flight had a destination. The cost of missing it was total. The dense purple forest ended without warning, giving way to a vast open expanse of blue grass that swayed like a living ocean under the twin moons. The change was immediate and stark. The cover they had relied on was gone. Every direction offered miles of visibility. They were exposed. The wind whispered through the tall stalks, a constant sighing sound that masked other noises. It was a beautiful, terrifying landscape. Nowhere to hide. Movement flickered in the grass ahead. Not the wind. Something else. A ripple spread through the blue stalks, a wave moving against the breeze. It was the passage of something large traveling just beneath the surface, its bulk disturbing the roots. A roamer. They were massive burrowers, their true form rarely seen, known only by the unsettling waves they made. You couldn't outrun what you couldn't see. You could only hope its path didn't intersect with yours. A sharp cry cut through the air from above. A skimmer launched from a distant rock spire, its leathery wings catching the moonlight. Its call was a high, piercing shriek that carried for miles. An alarm. It would alert every predator and watcher patrol in the sector to movement on the plains. They were prey in the open, announced to every hunter in the territory. Kane's tactics had to change. He couldn't just move quietly. He had to move smart. He used the skimmer's own flight path, timing their sprints between the sparse rock outcroppings to coincide with its turns, using its blind spots. He considered creating a diversion, starting a small fire in the dry grass far to the east to draw attention away. But the risk of the blaze turning back on them was too great. The open ground was a chessboard and every move had to be calculated. Then the howls started. A chorus of them, deep and guttural, echoing across the plains. Night hunters. Pack predators, six-limbed and fast. They were being tracked. The sound was getting closer, triangulating their position. Kane pushed them into a run, abandoning stealth for raw speed. The bluegrass whipped at their legs. Maya stumbled. He caught her arm without breaking stride, pulling her along. The howls turned into eager barks. The pack had their scent. They broke into a small clearing between the grass and a sharp drop into a dry riverbed. It was a trap. 3 night hunters emerged from the grass ahead, their blue-black fur making them patches of moving shadow, their eyes glowing a faint amber. They were cornered. There was no time for a plan. Kane shoved LRA and Mia toward the steepest part of the bank. "Down, now!" He turned to face the lead hunter, the scavenged watcher blade in his hand, feeling small and inadequate. The creature charged. He sidestepped at the last second, driving the blade into its shoulder. It wasn't a killing blow. The animal yowled and twisted, its claws raking across his ribs before it fell back. The other 2 hesitated, circling. It was all the time he needed. He backed toward the edge and half slid, half fell into the riverbed after the others. They huddled in the gravel at the bottom, listening to the frustrated snarls from above. The immediate threat was gone, but the cost was written on Kane's side. The deep gashes bled freely, staining his torn shirt dark. The pain was a sharp, grinding focus. Normally, his augmentations would already be clotting the wound, numbing the pain, but the poison in his system was a systemic drain, fighting his body's own enhanced healing. The wound stayed open, sapping his strength, a constant aching reminder of his dwindling time. The environment was no longer a backdrop. It was an active enemy, working in concert with the Watchers. Every hard-won mile was paid for in blood and pain. The planes were taking their toll. A fine tremor started in his left hand. He made a fist to stop it, the motion quick and hidden. The poison was no longer a threat. It was a process. It had begun its work deep inside him. A slow, methodical unraveling. His vision blurred at the edges for a second, the purple landscape swimming before it snapped back into sharp, painful focus. A searing heat started along his nerves. A low burn that began in his extremities and was slowly working its way inward. It felt like a fire being banked in his veins. He hit it all. When his breath caught from a sudden spike of pain in his joints, he turned it into a cough. When a wave of dizziness made the ground tilt, he stopped to check their back trail. Using the moment to brace himself against a tree trunk, he kept his face neutral, his voice level when he gave directions. Maya's trust was a fragile thing. LRA's hope was a thin thread. He would not be the one to snap them. His own suffering was irrelevant. Their survival was the only metric that mattered. His body fought a silent, losing war. The augmentations the Watchers had given him, the ones that doubled his stamina and accelerated his healing, were now his only defense. They were slowing the toxin spread, fighting a rearguard action against the inevitable. The deep gashes from the Night Hunter should have scabbed over in hours. They still seeped the skin around them an angry red. His enhanced metabolism was burning through his energy reserves just to maintain basic function. The tools meant to make him a perfect hunter were now only prolonging his agony. The irony was not lost on him. They had built him to be strong, and that strength was only making his death longer and more difficult. He knew the math. The weekly antidote was not a cure. It was a reset. Without it, the toxin would finish its work. He had days left. Maybe less. This physical deadline dictated everything now. He chose paths for speed over safety. He pushed their pace even when every step sent jolts of pain up his legs. He calculated risks he would have never taken before. Because the greatest risk was now running out of time. He had to get them to the mountains, to the foothills where Haven was hidden, before his body gave out entirely. His own collapse was a fixed point on the horizon. He was navigating toward it. His sacrifice was no longer a choice he might have to make. It was a certainty he was walking toward. The question had changed. It was no longer if he would fall, but when and how. Would it be in a fight buying them seconds with his last breath? Or would it be a quiet fading? His body simply shutting down mid-step in the night. He hoped for the fight. It was a cleaner end. A more useful one. He began to plan for it. To look at the terrain not just as a route to safety, but as a series of potential final stands. Places where one man could hold off many. Where his fall could mean their escape. The weight of the promise settled deeper. He would get them to Haven. The cost was already written in the fire spreading through his blood. The air in the narrow ravine grew still. The scuff of a boot on loose rock echoed from ahead, followed by the low hum of active weaponry. A Watcher patrol, 3 scouts in dark tactical gear, blocked the only way out. They moved with the confident precision of hunters who had finally cornered their prey. Their shock staves were primed, casting a faint blue glow on the steep rock walls. The narrowness of the passage showed in their stance. They were ready for a close-quarters fight, expecting fear, expecting surrender. Kane did not hesitate. He shoved LRA back, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Take her. Go back the way we came. Find another path. Don't stop." He didn't look at them. His entire focus was on the 3 figures advancing. This was not a discussion. It was an order from a man who knew the math of survival. Their chance lay in his ability to hold this choke point. LRA grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her back into the shadows of the ravine. Their footsteps faded quickly, swallowed by the stone. The first scout lunged, his shock staff aimed for Kane's throat. Kane ducked under the swing, the electric crackle of the weapon passing inches from his head. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. He moved inside the scout's guard, his augmented strength driving his elbow into the man's ribs. He felt bone give way. The scout grunted, stumbling back. This was not the clean, efficient capture he had been trained for. This was messy, personal. It was the first time he had used his hunter's skills to protect instead of capture. The violence felt different, necessary. The second scout came in high. Kane used the terrain, ducking behind a jutting rock shelf. The shock staff slammed into stone, sending a shower of fragments into the air. Kane used the distraction. He came up fast, grabbing the scout's weapon arm and twisting it back with a sharp, brutal motion. The snap of bone was loud in the confined space. He drove the scout's own helmet into the rock face. The man went down and did not get up. The woman stepped from behind the boulder slowly, one hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Her movements were stiff, braced for a blow. Her eyes, the same dark, intelligent pools as Mia's, flickered from his face to the collar on his neck and back. She measured the risk in the silence, her fear a sharp scent on the air. Then necessity won. She spoke, her voice low and steady, fighting to keep the tremor out of it. "It is my mother they want this time," she said. The words were simple. They landed with the weight of a stone. "They are coming for her, like they took my tar." She watched him, waiting for the meaning to sink in. This was no routine patrol. This was a targeted retrieval. His mission parameters had been a lie, a sanitized version of a darker truth. He wasn't hunting random fugitives. He was the instrument of a specific, calculated cruelty. The Watchers wanted to dismantle this family piece by piece. She explained it in clipped, efficient sentences, as if stating facts made the horror easier to bear. The Watchers valued two things above all: usable labor and useful knowledge. They took the strong for the mines and the garrisons, their bodies broken for resource extraction and enforcement. They took the intelligent for their research facilities, their minds bent to the task of perfecting the very systems of control that bound them. Her husband, Tar, had been a scientist. His understanding of molecular structures and crystalline energy was a prize. They came for him in the night, just as they had come for Kane's family. They took his mind and with it his freedom. Now they had decided his mother-in-law held similar value. Perhaps she shared his knowledge. Perhaps her age and experience made her a suitable subject for a different kind of experiment. LRA did not know. She only knew the enforcers were coming and their purpose was singular. They would take the last pillar of her daughter's world. They would leave Mia with nothing. Kane listened, and the last of his professional detachment crumbled. He saw the entire, monstrous machine clearly for the first time. He wasn't just a hunter following orders. He was a key component in a cycle of systematic destruction. Every person he had ever captured and returned had a story like this. A family, a reason they ran. A life the Watchers wanted to strip and use until nothing was left. His efficiency had been a virtue to them. It meant he was good at breaking things that mattered. The abstract evil of the Watchers collapsed into the single, immediate tragedy. It was no longer a vast, impersonal force. It was a ship coming to take a grandmother from her granddaughter. It was a boot about to stamp down on the last ember of this family's hope. His role in it felt suddenly filthy, a stain on his hands that no amount of obedience could wash away. He was not just enabling their cruelty. He was delivering it. He weighed the two paths in the cold silence of his own mind. Each one led to a kind of death. The first was simple. Do his job, secure the targets and signal for pickup. It was the path of survival, the one his body was conditioned to follow. It meant hands on binders. It meant watching them get pulled into a transport hold. It meant a fresh dose of antidote and another 7 days of borrowed life. The cost was clear. He would be delivering a child and her mother back to the people who had killed her father and were coming for her grandmother. He would be the agent of their destruction. His own hands would complete the work the Watchers had started. The thought turned his stomach. The life he would be saving was his own, and it was a life that would have to live with that choice. Every dose of antidote after this would taste of their fear. The second path was a firebreak. Defiance. It meant prying the collar from his neck. The instant the seal broke, two things would happen. A high-frequency distress signal would pulse out from the device, a bright, clear beacon to every Watcher patrol and drone within 50 miles, and the reservoir of toxin embedded against his carotid artery would begin to empty into his bloodstream. The process was not instant. The designers had made it slow. A final lesson in obedience, a guarantee that any attempt to remove it would result in agony. followed by a death that was both certain and humiliatingly public. They would come for him, and they would find him writhing in the dirt, a failed experiment. It was a death sentence signed with his own hands. He ran the tactical assessment automatically, his augmented mind pulling data. The caller's distress signal was a fixed frequency. Standard watcher response time to a Priority 1 alert in this sector was 8 minutes for aerial units, 17 for ground reinforcements. That was their window. His hunter's knowledge was their only asset. He knew this terrain like the back of his hand. He knew the old river beds that could hide their heat signatures, the rock formations that scrambled low-altitude scans. He knew the patrol schedules, the blind spots in their sensor grids, the weak points in their drone programming. The very skills they had given him to make him a perfect tracker could now be used to hide from them. The strength in his limbs, the endurance in his lungs, the sharpness of his eyes, all of it, every upgrade, was a weapon they had handed him. He could turn it against them. The risk was staggering. He would be a dead man running, with a chemical clock ticking in his veins, leading 2 civilians through hostile territory, with an entire military force descending on their heads. The odds of success were a number so small it was meaningless. It was a suicide mission with extra steps. But as he looked from LRA's fearful, resigned face to Mia's unwavering, trusting one, the calculation shifted. The cost of compliance was no longer an abstract moral failure. It was a specific, intimate betrayal. The thought of walking away from them, of leaving this child to the same fate as his own, was a colder, more certain death than any toxin. It was the death of the man he used to be, the last of him. The decision settled in his bones. It was not a shout or a dramatic gesture. It was a quiet click, like a final piece locking into place. He would take the collar off. He would lead them out. He met LRA's eyes and gave a single, sharp nod. It was all the explanation he could offer. The resolve was a solid weight in his chest, heavier than the metal at his throat and far more real. The hunter was done. A different man began to move. His fingers found the seam where cold metal met skin. The collar wasn't meant to come off. Its design was a promise of permanence. He braced one hand against his own throat, the other working a sharp-edged stone he'd pulled from the soil. It was a crude tool, but leverage was leverage. He dug the point into the microscopic gap, metal grinding against metal. A fine tremor ran through his arms. LRA watched, her breath held, one hand over Mia's eyes. The seal gave with a sharp crack that echoed too loudly in the quiet forest. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Silence. The heavy weight fell away from his neck, landing in the purple moss with a soft thud. A faint, pale line marked where it had been, the skin underneath tender and new-looking. Then the sound started. A low, insistent hum from the discarded device. It was a sound he knew from training simulations, a Priority 1 distress beacon. It was pinging their exact location into the net, a shining light on a watcher command screen. The calculus was immediate. They had 8 minutes until the first aerial unit arrived. Possibly less. He looked at LRA, his voice flat and stripped of all but the necessary facts. They know where we are. They are coming. We run now or we die here. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, the swift shift from hope to a grim, focused fear. There was no antidote for him anymore. The toxin was already in his blood, a slow, ticking clock they couldn't reset. His life was now measured in days, not miles. Maya pulled free from her mother's hand, her large eyes fixed on him. The question was there, unspoken. Why would you do this? Why would you throw away your life for us? He met her gaze. The words came out rough, unpolished. They felt like the truest thing he had said in years. Because your daughter reminded me I'm still human. He glanced at the collar lying in the dirt, a dead piece of machinery now. Its logic was broken. His was not. And humans don't hunt children. The statement hung in the air, simple and final. The man who had followed orders was gone, buried with that device. What remained was something older, something the Watchers had failed to erase entirely. A protector, a father, a man who would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned, his enhanced eyes already scanning the terrain, picking the route that offered the most cover. He moved, and the 2 females fell in behind him without a word. Their flight began under the cold, twin light of the moons, a desperate rush into the deep purple unknown. The hum of the collar faded behind them, replaced by the sound of their own breathing and the pounding of their hearts. The chase was on.